We're ready for the second part of discourse, the statement of facts, also known as the narratio, the narration, which is helpful if you think about it, because what we're doing here is we're taking the facts that are relevant in the case and we're laying them out. It is a narration of the facts in the case. It really is a recital of those facts. All the ancient rhetoricians agreed that this was the one part of discourse, besides the proofs, that was always necessary to every speech. On some level, however extensive or shallow it might be, you need to give some background before you launch into your case. So consider what you're doing here. Wilson says that this is where all the salient facts are laid out. In the statement of facts, you're doing just that, laying out the pieces of the puzzle that you will assemble later. Now, I'm not a big puzzle guy. Usually I can't do puzzles because they put the age on there, and I'm not in those age ranges. The only ones I can really handle are the ones that are for 3 or 4 year olds. But if you are a puzzle person, you take those puzzle pieces and you lay them out. And in fact, the really big 5,000 piece Thomas Kincaid puzzles that are oozing with light, they'll put all the dark pieces in one part and all the light pieces in another. And you know how that goes. You try to separate out the edge pieces and all that stuff. You're laying out the pieces for assembly. Now, this is not like a puzzle. The problem I have with puzzles is that after you're done, you've got this beautiful picture that's got cuts all over it. It never looks whole. But this is what you need to understand, that you really are laying out the pieces for assembly. You are not attempting to be persuasive as you deliver the statement of facts. Of course, you need to understand that you are being persuasive. You are. But this is not the point where you're trying to persuade your audience. That will come in the proofs. If I could divide the parts of discourse for you, the first 3 parts of discourse are persuading your audience to listen to your proofs. And then your proofs are persuading your audience about the issue. So you're being persuasive, but the persuasion is indirect. Just think of Thanksgiving dinner. All right? Setting the table is not Thanksgiving dinner. But setting the table is an important part of Thanksgiving dinner. You want to put the plate, and you're going to set out your nicest china and your nicest dishes and put the plates in the right place, and the napkins and the forks and spoons and knives and glasses and so on. You put them in the right place on the table. That's a part of it. And really even the meal itself is set out in different dishes. That's part of your arrangement. Think of the narratio as doing just that, setting the table for what you're going to argue. Plates, glasses, utensils, the main dishes to be served, all set in place so that when we sit down, we're ready to eat. That's the narratio. If you're baking a cake, you make sure you have all the ingredients. You don't want to get in the middle and realize you don't have any baking soda or don't have any salt. Then you have to run over to the neighbors and ask for some. So you set them out on the counter. This is what you're doing really with the statement of facts. You're taking your arguments in a sense, or the facts I should say, and you're setting them out on the counter. Before you build a house, you take the blueprints and you make sure you have enough 2x4s and enough screws and screwdrivers and hammers and nails and so on. The Wilson said the narratio is where you lay out the facts of the case, collecting the materials you'll be using later in the argument. The rest of your discourse will refer back to those facts, and in fact will be built on those facts. Sharon Crowley said in the narrative, A rhetor takes the issue as clearly and simply as possible. A rhetor states the issue as clearly and simply as possible. Quintilian said, in keeping with the facts we desire to be believed, we shall, for instance, represent a person accused of theft as covetous, accused of adultery as lustful, accused of homicide as rash, or attribute the opposite qualities to these persons if we're defending them. Further, he said we must do the same with place, time, and the like. So, again, as I said, the statement of facts is not directly persuasive. It's indirectly persuasive. But still, you are shading what your audience understands. You are preparing your audience for your arguments. We want to put these facts in a light that is favorable to our case. Cicero argued that the statement of facts could be omitted. He was the one who broke with other rhetors to say that. The statement of facts was not necessary. He said if the audience was already familiar with the facts in the case, then you could leave it out. But I would argue that there's a different reason to present the facts in the case. You're not always presenting those facts in order to inform your audience. And this is something you need to keep in mind. There is a way of presenting the facts in the case in a condescending manner so that your audience feels that you're disrespecting them. They feel talked down to. They feel like you're speaking to them like they were a little child. You want to avoid that. So how do you do that? Well, when I'm stating the facts in the case, I'm not just stating it so that my audience knows. And I'm not assuming that my audience doesn't know. In fact, when I'm presenting the facts in the case, in many cases, I'm letting the audience know that I've done my homework, that I know what I'm talking about. That's an important thing to keep in mind. Because when you've done the homework, your audience feels that you respect them. And that makes them more receptive towards you. When the audience feels respected, then they're more willing to listen to you. Two things that you should strive to accomplish then in the statement of facts or in the narratio. Number one, give the background information. That can include the history of the issue. And secondly, explain why the issue is disputed. Explain to your audience what disputes there are about this or what arguments you're trying to answer at this time. Cicero suggested a digression to attack the opposition, also to amuse the audience, or to amplify their understanding of the case by comparisons. There are three characteristics of a good narratio. Number one, clear. Number two, concise. Number three, brief. I suggest to my students, of course, depending on the length of your piece of discourse, but even with a very long, multiple page, 10-page paper, for example, I recommend that your narratio not be more than 2 to 3 paragraphs. And normally, for the work that you're doing as students, I recommend that you not be more than a paragraph with your narratio. It may be a longer paragraph, but limit it to a paragraph. The next part of discourse is the division or the partitio. This is the place where you point down the road and explain to your audience where you're taking them. This really is another way that you show goodwill towards your audience. It's normally best not to tie your audience up, throw them in the back seat of the car and tell them to shut up and hang on and you'll find out where we're going. Your audience wants to know what you're going to say. What are you getting at? What point are you making? Now there is a case, there's a time and a place for the mystery, to keep it secret, to have a surprise at the end. And sometimes it can be effective if your audience is wondering, where's he going? Where is he going? They're following with you. As long as they're with you, that's okay. But for the most part, people want to know where you're going. I think of my own kids. Friday night, it's family night. We say, load up the car. As soon as we say we want you to get in the car, they want to know, where are we going? Where are we going? What are we doing? What are we doing for family night? They always want to know. It's human nature. We all want to know. And as a speaker, you want your audience to have an idea of where you're headed. People like some mystery, but only if it seems like you're there to clear up the mystery of what you're about to argue. As long as they're confident in that, they'll tolerate it. If they've been listening for 10 minutes and they still have no idea what you're talking about or where you're going, chances are you've already lost them, and if you haven't lost them yet, you will in the next couple of minutes. So I say, generally speaking, you have a limit of about 10 minutes before you lose your audience. The best advice is this, the best advice I could give you. Don't impose on your audience. Explain how things are going to work. Now, that being said, you also don't want to give away all your secrets either. This is an area where the ancient rhetoricians differed from modern teachers of speech and rhetoric. Speech and composition. And you probably are recognizing that right now because your speech teachers tell you don't ever tell your audience what you're going to tell them. They have a point. I think the ancients had a point as well. You don't want to give away all your secrets. You want to, if in the first 10 minutes of your speech you've already told them everything you're going to say and the rest of the speech is just repeating what you've already said, you just weary your audience. You're not effective. So you have to have secrets, in a sense. Your division really introduces and kind of gives a sketch of what you're going to say. And if it's an effective division, then it makes your audience wonder, I wonder what he'll say under that point. What points will he make there? So you want to give a thumbnail sketch of what you're about to do. Imagine if you're telling someone to follow you down to a restaurant at the other end of town, okay? They don't know where this restaurant is. So it's a good idea for you because, following somebody down the road can be confusing and unless they stay right up on your tail, it can be easy to get lost. So it's a good idea to explain how you plan to get there in advance. We're going to go down the street to the stop sign. We're going to turn left. Now we're going to go through about 2-3 stoplights. And then we're going to turn left again on such and such a boulevard. And then we'll drive about a mile down that road and the restaurant will be there on the right. It's this restaurant. That's where we're going. That just shows respect to your audience when you do that. Now, you can always throw in a surprise twist later on, but if they know the general direction of where you're headed, they won't wonder if you're lost when you take that sudden, unexpected turn. Again, I'm repeating myself, but this is a way of showing goodwill to your audience. It tells your audience also, and this is important. In fact, forgive me for being jumbled for a second here, but let me back up a minute. You've all sat through speeches, lessons, sermons, lectures before, where not only did you wonder where the speaker was going, but you wondered if he knew where he was going as well. You're listening to him and you're thinking, does he even know what he's talking about? Does he even know what he wants to say? Or is he just rambling and saying whatever comes to mind in that moment? That is one of the faults of extemporaneous speaking. By the way, John Broadus recommended that the best way to speak extemporaneously is to have a very simple, easy outline. that you have clear in your head that you can follow. That'll keep you on track. So, you want your audience to know where you're going, but you also want your audience to know that you know where you're going, that you have a direction that you're heading. It also shows goodwill to your audience in another sense, because it lets them in on the secret. We all like to be let in on the secret. It means that somebody is bringing us into their confidence. So when you announce to your audience that this is what I'm going to argue and this is how I'm going to argue it, you've let them in on the secret. Now they feel like they are part of your discourse then. They feel involved. So it has that added effect of making your audience feel like they're a part of things. They're not just being talked to or talked at, but they are being brought along in your discourse. So there are two goals then in your division. Goal number one, state your thesis. Tell your audience what you're arguing for. Don't leave it up in the air. You don't want your audience wondering all throughout your discourse what your position is on this issue, what exactly it is you're arguing for. So early on, you want to state your thesis. You want to tell your audience what your position is, what you're going to argue. I hate to keep quoting John Broadus, but his book on the preparation and delivery of sermons is excellent. And Broadus brings out a point that I think is very helpful. I probably mentioned this before, but he says that every speaker, every writer, every reader, before you start composing your discourse, you need to sit down and write out in 1 to 2 sentences exactly what you're arguing. If you can get that down, and sometimes that's difficult to do, if you can get that down, then your audience will also know what you're going to say. Because if you know what you're arguing, then your audience knows as well. So the first goal of the division is to state your thesis. Tell your audience exactly what you're going to say. And then secondly, outline the arguments. Outline your arguments. Now, at this point, you don't want to give all your arguments. You want to arrange your arguments under main headings. Look, any piece of discourse, if it's worth anything, is going to have a lot of arguments. I mean like 10, 12, sometimes 20 arguments that you're making. But you don't want all your arguments to be main points, though. So you want to divide your arguments into categories. You might look at it and say, well, these arguments here come from this direction, and these arguments over here come from this direction over here. Arrange your arguments under main headings and announce what those main headings will be. Today, I will be arguing for the glorious tradition of coupon clipping. First, I want to argue that coupon clipping is biblical. Secondly, I want to argue that coupon clipping is practical. Thirdly, I want to argue that coupon clipping is economical. Now, those are main headings, and I would have several arguments under each heading. When I announce those main headings, the audience is interested, intrigued. He said he's going to argue that this is biblical. How is he going to do that? He said he's going to argue that this is practical. I think I know where he's going to go with that. He's going to argue that it's economical. But you know, the other advantage of it is that it makes it easy for your audience to know what you're saying. They've got these points in their head. From there, you can have several arguments under each main point. You've given your audience a preview, a sneak peek at what you're about to say. Your audience feels like they're a part of the affair, not just peeping Tom standing outside trying to look through the blinds in your windows. They know where you're going, and probably know where you are in your speech as well, because they know, okay, he's in the biblical set of arguments. Now he's in the practical arguments. And the most important thing, especially if you have a lot of arguments, is that they know how soon before you're finished. Believe it or not, I know that you already know this, your audience is interested in when you'll finish. The audience has a vested interest in you getting to the conclusion as well. Now, you don't always need to announce all your arguments. I've said that. It's good to put them under headings or categories. In fact, there are sometimes when you should not even announce all your main points. Sometimes you shouldn't announce how many points or announce your points at all. For example, sometimes the element of surprise is more important. And in order to preserve that surprise, you just launch right into each point and you don't announce what the points are. If one of your main arguments might set your audience against you, make sure that you don't say so early on. Save it. Conceal it until you've prepared your audience to hear it. If announcing your arguments will disrupt the flow or the continuity of thought in your discourse, then that would be another reason not to announce ahead of time what your arguments will be. The most important time not to announce your arguments, not to say I'm going to argue this, 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 and this, is if you have a lot of arguments. Like, for example, if you have more than five or more main points, really. Because just in listing out those 5 points, I'm going to argue that you should clip coupons because it's biblical, because it's practical, because it's economical, because it's good exercise, because it's a good occupation for you. You keep listing those. Your audience is horrified. They're thinking, good grief, how long is this guy going to speak? Because they're thinking for each one of these points, you're going to have 10 minutes, 15 minutes of stuff to say. And they're calculating in their mind how long this speech is going to take, or this piece of discourse. They're looking to see, good grief, when is he going to finish? They're looking ahead to see how many pages this argument is, and so on. It's the same thing when you read a book and you come to a chapter and the chapter's 100 pages. That's not a good thing. You want shorter chapters than that. So, you don't want to discourage your audience right off the bat. If you have 5 or more main points, don't announce what they are. It is discouraging to your audience to have them all listed from the beginning. At the same time, if you have 5 or more points, you might want to let folks know that this is going to be more than just a quick trip around the corner to the 7-Eleven. We're going to be driving for an hour or so. Sometimes the kids and I get in the car and we're driving somewhere and it's just a quick drive, across town. The kids aren't super anxious about that. They want to know where we're going, but that's all. But if it's a long trip, like 3 or 4 hours, I need to tell them, hey, we're going to be in the car for a while, guys. It helps to save on all those, are we there yet from the back. So here's what you do. You got 7 points, all right? You don't want to say nothing about that. You have 7 points. If you've said my first point is this, the audience is fine. The second point is this, the audience is fine. Third point is this. Everyone expects 3 points. Fourth point is this. Okay, well, some 3 or 4 points. Fifth point is this. Now the audience is thinking this is probably his last. My 6th point is this. Now your audience is thinking, when is this guy going to get done? So, here's a strategic point. You don't want to announce those 7 points. You don't want to say, I'm going to make 7 points. My first point is going to be this. My second point is this. You don't want to do that. What you want to do is simply to say, I want to make 7 points here. By the way, there are some interesting ways that people have found to make multiple points. The 10 Commandments of coupon clipping. 7 strategies for coupon clipping. Not that any one of you want to give a persuasive speech on coupon clipping, but nonetheless, I think you get what I'm saying. If you've said that, that's sufficient for announcing your points. So you can announce, the division is negotiable. You don't have to announce your points at all. You can simply state your thesis or not. You don't even have to do that. As long as you have it clear in your head, and it's going to be obvious pretty quickly to your audience what you're going to argue, you don't have to state the thesis. Then so you can state the thesis or you don't have to. Then when it comes to announcing your points, it is helpful, and there are times where you ought to announce your points. Say, this is what I'm going to argue. I'm going to make these 3 main points. You can also simply announce the number of points that you will be making. And thirdly, you can skip it altogether. You don't have to announce the number of points, what the points are. You can simply launch into your proofs. You just want to make sure that strategically that's the best plan. And along with that, you want to make sure that it will be pretty obvious to your audience when you're actually making your arguments. So you want to keep that straight. Now, the division, like the statement of facts, ought to be clear and brief. So keep that in mind as well. It shouldn't even be a paragraph. 1 sentence, perhaps, to introduce the division. 1 sentence stating the thesis, and 1 sentence stating the main points. And that would be the limit of it. That would be the maximum size of your division. Okay, we'll come back and look at the 3rd and 4th part of discourse next.